Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, and today we are going to be talking about something that I think is probably on your mind and probably something that you're thinking about. We're going to do some reflection, and we're going to be joined by Dexter Weber, and he is Business Development Manager of Automation Integration Solutions over at TGW. And we've had Dex on the show before to talk to us about a few things in the automation space in the warehousing world. But today's focus is really going to be looking at a reflection on 2025 and some of the trends and things that have happened, and especially around that peak and holiday season, which as we're recording this is just coming to a close here now. We're almost there from a cutoff perspective. I know I just ordered like my last minute gifts last night before the cutoff, shipping cutoff, and we're also going to talk a little bit about how to look at 2026 and projects and what really goes into that, and what does it mean to say like I need to bring in some automation for the 2026 holiday and peak season to be prepared, because I've come out of 2025 and I'm like, these are the areas I need to improve. I need to get more throughput. I need to be more effective, and maybe you struggled a little bit. So we're going to talk about that process and what actually goes in to planning and making sure that these projects can happen successfully and on time, and what is maybe just feasible and maybe what's not feasible for 2026 holiday season. So Dex, welcome in, and it's great to have you join us again. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be back on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to get you back on and happy to talk about this. I think this is something that is probably top of mind for a lot of people at this point, and something they're thinking and wondering. And I think the more that we see these types of solutions, automation, robotics, and software, even, right, all come into the fold, right, the more we wonder, well, how quickly can I actually get some of these things up and running in my operation? So excited to dive into that with you today. Now, tell us a little bit, and let's look back kind of on the 2025 year. So tell us a little bit about kind of what are you seeing from your customers, and what have you heard now as we're kind of at the end of the year, on what were some challenges for them, and what really kind of created some potential friction for them, especially through this holiday season.
Yeah, great question. So, holiday season, as you know, is kind of a wild time for many of our partners,
Sure.
especially the retail side of things. Um, and yeah, we're excited to say that a lot of our partners have had their biggest and most successful peak season yet. So, that's some exciting news. But during peak season, nothing's perfect. There's a lot of great technologies behind them, supporting them. But really, at the core, it's the people in the warehouses that are coordinating, communicating, putting in the extra hours, working hard, really to bring smiles to everyone's faces over this holiday season. So,
Sure.
holiday wouldn't be so special without the long journey, the supply chain complexities, and the people to really bring it all together. So you asked a little bit about like maybe some of the frictions or challenges that
Hmm.
people have been facing. So I'm on the business development side, so I'm mainly working with companies looking into automation. Some have
Okay.
experience with it, others don't. But in my discussions around peak season, which is always a big topic when you're starting to, to kind of explore automation, bottlenecks are really often around training is probably one of the biggest ones, along
Yeah.
with retaining labor, and then like the packaging process can be quite cumbersome. And I think it's really because the warehouse environment can be quite competitive. So especially if you're in an area where you have your warehouse and there's 10, 20, 30 other large warehouses in the area, that labor is really competitive, and you want to have a better work environment than the others, and you want to be able to stand out a little bit to make sure you're attracting the top talent. And so when it comes down to this season piece, like the training is probably one of the biggest impacts. You
Mm.
hear of people hiring maybe 1,000 people, knowing they need 500, and they're just hoping to get people trained maybe a couple months ahead of peak season, and knowing that there's going to be some attrition, people falling off, just hoping that you have the right number at the end there. And when you think about how complex that is, that's a a lot of people involved. That's a lot of effort
Yeah.
involved and a lot of costs going into these trainings. So I think that's probably one of the biggest ones. And there's just a lot of pressure, a lot of demand. So during the peak season, the pace needs to be really quick. It's a lot of physical effort. And then, picking, packing, labeling, sorting, shipping, all of those also require a lot of work. And those are kind of where we see more of the bottlenecks in the warehouse. So I'd say mainly, yeah, training, labor retention, and then also like that pick and pack process.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think really, really interesting points there, and certainly a super competitive landscape when it comes to warehouse workers, especially during that season, right, the
Yeah,
holiday season, and I love that you called out the warehouse workers as the one that are delivering the smiles this year. I think maybe our warehouse workers and our delivery drivers are probably the true elves of this
absolutely.
season, right? So
Yeah.
appreciate that. But I'm curious there because you mentioned a lot about training, right? And training
Mhm.
being a challenging point, which I think is very true, right? Because you're having this influx of employees that are seasonal, temporary, that maybe have never seen your operation before, or never been exposed to the system or the technologies that you use. But I'm curious, the more we get automation and robotics into the operation, do you see the training curve kind of reduce and go down?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the biggest like selling points to this kind of technology. With some of our picking processes, for example, we do a lot of goods to person solutions. It's
Hmm.
kind of what we're quite well known for. And
Sure.
training can be same day. You can have people picking to rate, whereas when you're used to maybe more of a manual environment with batch picking and maybe carts around the warehouse, people need to learn where do I go to find this? Where am I scanning it? What are these products like? So it takes a little bit more time to really learn the products, the processes. So with automation, you're basically simplifying a lot of the processes and removing a lot of the either physical or also maybe sometimes with the software you're taking out some of the thoughts that need to go into it and just keeping operations a little bit more simple. So typically with training, you can reduce the training time, which is great. And that also
Mm.
means, of course, a huge cost savings when you start looking at you can train, maybe not two
Yeah.
months in advance, but you can get a little bit closer and maybe put your experienced people in a certain area where you might adapt to maybe more manual processes to help with peak season, and then put
Mhm.
like the newer, maybe short term labor there to kind of help with the peak season aspect where it's something where it's more simplified for them and it just makes it kind of a smoother process overall.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great call out there, and the cost right associated with that training is such a big factor too as well because
Yeah.
it's time invested and oftentimes when you get temporary holiday workers, they don't always last the whole holiday, right? They may
Yeah.
decide they want to stop showing up for work, or I know certainly in my experience when I was a warehouse manager, we had somebody a couple times people just say, "Oh, I'm going to the bathroom," and they never come back, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very interesting, and that training portion, while it takes time, right, but that time equals that cost and money, right? You're investing into them, so the easier to make that training, the better, and obviously the cost you can reduce over time. So very interesting there, and I guess as we look back at 2025 too, I'm curious from an automation and solution perspective, what were some of the kind of most maybe the areas within operations or like solution specific that people were asking for or looking for?
Yeah. So I think when people are looking for automation, typically like peak season's like a big piece behind it, but you're not
Hmm.
necessarily designing an automated system to perform just for peak season. You don't want to spend a bunch of money on extra equipment that will maybe be 10 days or 14 days of the year or whatever that looks like. So you kind of
Hmm.
have to balance those processes with like manual processes and automation and find like a really good balance in between there. But what we've been seeing a lot more requests on are maybe receiving technologies. You think of these high
Hmm.
Q 40-foot containers, boxes loaded to the
Sure.
floor. It's a very cumbersome process. And when you're in cold environments like Michigan over here, you have a lot of snow. Those trailers can be quite cold, so
Oh yeah,
it
yeah.
takes a long time to unload those things. So I think we're seeing more people looking at how can we unload these trailers and get products into inventory in a quicker way. But the other thing we're seeing a lot more of is maybe mobile automation or blended automation. So by mobile, I'm meaning like mobile robots, for example, are a growing request for us. Um,
Okay.
and then I think also like blended is how can you maybe take your fixed automation and blend it with maybe mobile robotics or mobile processes. So I think that part's growing. And then of course we do a lot with high throughput environments, and those tend to be a little bit more fixed automation environments. So that's still strong for us. But I would
Mm,
say the mobile category is more of a growing category for us. And I also think part of it's because it has easier barriers to entry, right? It's a little bit more affordable and scalable in small increments. So we're getting a lot more requests on, hey, what can we do with this kind of technology to help improve our warehouses? So mainly those technologies are what we're hearing a little bit more about. And then when it comes to processes, it's receiving, picking, and packing are, kind of the bigger ones we're seeing a lot of demand for.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and I think very interesting to see the developments there, especially on the receiving side. I think
Mhm.
as we're recording this, there's just UPS just made a nice investment in doing some of that unloading stuff as well, and
Yeah.
I think it's really becoming viable solutions out there to look at that, and as you said, no one wants to be in a container when it's freezing out, or no one wants to be in a
Yeah.
container in Texas in the middle of the summer either, right? When it's hot. So not really a fun place to be overall. So I think
Yeah.
automation and robotics addressing that is very much welcome from a human perspective. So very interesting to kind of look back now as people look back, right? Oftentimes they're seeing where maybe they fell short or they had some challenges with certain things and looking at those gaps. So how do we, as operators, take a look at our operations and what happened during our holiday season or just throughout the year in general, and start to kind of evaluate the gaps? How do we go about that thoughtfully and go from not just kind of complaining about the gaps,
Yeah.
but really evaluating them and determining like where we need to focus in the new year?
Yeah, yeah, love that question. I think it's really important when you're looking at, your peak season, for example, or even just your daily operations. Yeah, you're
Hmm.
identifying those gaps. You're understanding, okay, yeah, our bottleneck for speed might be picking, or it might be packing, or it might be a certain other area. So when you're typically doing this, you're also looking at, okay, what can we make improvements on? And a lot of times you're looking at how can we improve manually, or maybe even just within our computer software systems. Like you're trying to drive as much performance increases as you can manually. But you're also trying to look at big picture, long term, maybe some growth. So typically, a lot of our companies they have maybe a team dedicated to maybe continuous improvement or something along those
Sure.
lines, where they're trying to identify maybe those gaps and what they can do about it. They'll start doing their early research, often finding that, yeah, automation, robotics, those kind of technologies can help out with those gaps. So they'll reach out to companies after doing some research. They'll reach out to a systems integrator like TGW, for example. And then what we like to do is kind of start that journey with them in those early stages and really take like a holistic view of the business. So it's not just, hey, we identified these gaps in this specific warehouse, but we want to understand, what does your whole distribution network look like?
Mm.
What types of items are you handling? Because that might help identify different processes or different environments that need maybe more attention. Are you looking for your warehouse improvements at a brownfield existing site, existing operations? Or are you growing, looking into maybe a new greenfield site that could be different? And then, of course, most importantly, like what are your service level agreements? Like what are your customers expecting of you? And
Mm.
then just kind of what challenges in general are you experiencing? Maybe what things are happening in your industry. Certain ones are shrinking, certain ones are growing. And the supply base is, of course, always adapting. So there's a lot of complexities going into it. We look at future objectives, and then kind of in that early phase, along with asking those questions, we start to gather what we call design KPIs and some data. And that really helps us understand a little bit more of what they're looking to accomplish and what kind of technologies might be there. And also kind of help us identify, like, is there really a business case for automation? Can you benefit
Hmm.
from it? Um, you know, I'd love to say yes every time, but sometimes
For
there's
sure.
times where it's like, yeah, this, I wouldn't recommend this right now. Like maybe in the future, but it's not the right fit for what you're doing. So this kind of process involves getting like CAD drawings of the warehouse, master SKU data, so understanding, your dimensions, your weights, um,
Hmm.
a year of shipment data, future projections. Do you plan to grow 5% a year, 10% a year? You start to look at, working hours, working days, how many people per process. And then combined with all this information, we'll do a site visit. And this is going to help us see how the warehouse operates. It allows us to talk to the people in and out of it every day, really get a better understanding of their challenges and their processes, and it really sets the stage for the beginning foundation of collaborating and finding, the right solutions for our partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot goes into that process, right? And a lot goes into just even kind of identifying and figuring out like what is potentially viable and what can we do. It's much more than just going to like a Modex or something and
Yeah,
saying like, hey, I think I want that, right? And
yeah,
can you put that in for me, right? So a lot more goes into that, and you mentioned in there about whether it's a brownfield or a greenfield site. So like an existing building that already has infrastructure and things in place versus a brand new fresh slate, essentially, right?
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how does that come into play with some of these projects? I mean, how does the physical site kind of dictate, I guess, one, what is possible, and then two, the project timeline around it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's like an impact when you're kind of comparing those options. So greenfield sites can go in a couple of ways. Like you might have nothing built, and you're going to be using automation, and you might design the
Hmm.
building around the automation solution. Um, and this is kind of like an ideal scenario of building, like, making a smoother project. But the challenge with that is, you still need to build the warehouse. So this can take a
Yeah.
significant number of years. This is a longer term thing. Also, with greenfields, you might have an existing building, but it's a kind of a clean slate. Sure, you
Mm.
might have some building modifications that need to be made, but it, you get over the hurdle of having to build the building and go through all of those steps already. So it's a big savings on the overall timeline. And then it really kind of depends on a lot of different criteria, but you can, go live with something maybe in 6 months or 24 months, depending on the types of technology you're using. Um,
Mm.
and then when you look at brownfields, it's quite a bit of a different beast that you have to kind of overcome there. Um, Often you're designing around already existing operations. Um, and so in that scenario, the goal is how can I minimize the impact of, you know, uh, working around those operations.
Sure.
You want to impact it as little as possible. And then, sometimes there's already automation in place. And are you removing it? Is it outdated? Are you connecting to it? Is it just an expansion of something else you've already done there?
Mhm.
So those can all impact that a little bit more. And then, is there an area cleared planned for automation? So one of the projects I'm working on right now, they have existing operations, but they have an area
Mhm.
cleared ready to go. Um, so it's a little
Okay.
easier there. Or are you having to move things around and maybe potentially build it in phases? Because you look at some of these other sites, and um, you might have uh, some slow, kind of interesting growth, new technologies that you've pieced together over the years. And it's kind of like a unique process flow. Like it's not necessarily the
Mhm.
ideal process flow in the warehouse, but it's how you've adapted over time. So now when you're trying to replace maybe all of that with automation, you might have to do it in certain phases and really build it out in a smart way to make the best approach with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great. kind of differentiations there that you defined, and looking at that in different ways. And interesting, you mentioned there, some of these projects can be 6 months to as long as 24 months to implement. Obviously, the 24 months, right? We're not getting those in for
Yeah,
2026
yeah.
holiday season for sure. But I'm curious, on the brownfield side, right? Because you mentioned, you have existing operations going on, and maybe you have a space cleared, right? Which sounds like that would be easier to navigate. But what about if you have an operation and you don't have a specific space cleared, but you're gonna add this automation or whatever the solution is to existing parts of the operation, and I'm sure you get this a lot where people are like, well, the catch is that like my operation cannot stop, right? So
Yeah.
so how do you navigate that situation, and how do you prepare for that to make sure that, like, okay, we can continue shipping at the same rate that we're currently doing while this project is going on?
Yeah, and that requires a lot of collaboration.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's moving areas or moving processes, or sometimes changing the processes temporarily. It might mean you have to move these things around a couple of times as you phase in the automation. So um, it can be really challenging. You have to also look at building modifications that need to be made, new electrical drops, fire suppression, maybe compressed air. Maybe there's flooring or racking modifications. You might be adding a mezzanine or removing a mezzanine. So you're
Hmm.
constantly moving the materials around. Sometimes it might also mean you move some of your volume from one distribution center temporarily to another one to give yourself a little bit more space to work through. Um, so there's a lot of different scenarios when you're kind of doing that, and then we also need to look at it as like you need to take up space, and the challenge with that too is you need to take up more than just what you need for automation. So if you're involving like an automated storage and retrieval system like a mini load or a shuttle, you often have what we call like lay down space, and that's where you're putting the space to get everything assembled, and it takes up quite a bit of room, and then eventually you're working towards installing it in the right spot. And then you also need to keep the floor clear and maybe some dock doors clear where you're bringing materials in, you're sending stuff out. So it gets to be a little complicated with that. Um,
Hmm.
so I think it's really about working with the project teams and collaborating. And then, sometimes if we're tying into an existing system, it also involves maybe going in off hours to do some of the work to minimize impact to operations. But each scenario is kind of its own unique situation. So without going too granular or into too many details,
Sure.
basically it's you kind of have to work together to find the right plan because we know automation quite well. We know what it's capable of. We understand processes, but at the end of the day, if you're an operator and you're running your warehouses, or if you're a leader running those, you know what's most important. You know how your people work, so you're going to have to work with us to kind of guide us on. Okay, I know what we
Hmm.
can do instead, and we kind of work together to find the minimal impact. But
Yeah.
there's no way to really say like, oh yeah, we'll never fully impact your operations because that's just
Oh, sure. Yeah.
it's not realistic a lot of
Pretty
times.
impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting there, and I think really good call outs, right, on like some of the resources that you will need from a project perspective, like some dock area, some dock doors to be
Hmm.
utilizing, and how to shift and think of that, and a lot of planning goes into that, as you said, right,
Yeah.
and it's being able to do that. So when you talk about like kind of that situation and the brownfield where there's existing operations, or maybe it's some older infrastructure and needs to be updated a little bit, and things of that nature, it can sound like greenfield maybe is the easier way to go, right? But what are some potential things about like a greenfield operation and a project going into a greenfield that maybe people often or kind of frequently don't necessarily think about being a challenge?
Yeah, I think with greenfield sites, part of it, sometimes the timeline can be faster than a brownfield. Other times it can be longer. So it really depends on the scenario. But I think one of the biggest aspects of it is just there's a big cost to it. Like a brand new shiny warehouse, of course, comes with the price tag.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Along with the technology you put into it, there's a lot more infrastructure that needs to be built. So there's a lot of costs going into the warehouse itself, the automation, the building. There's a whole timeline surrounding that. But the other piece is you know, the competing costs, right? So when you're a big retailer, for example, automation and distribution is just one facet of your business. You could also look at opening stores. You could also look at going through acquisitions. So sometimes the budget for automation or some of these other projects might be competing with other strategic initiatives. So I think when you're looking at a greenfields and it's a lot of times costing more, um, that's probably one of the biggest impacts is just cost, timeline, and other competing opportunities that you have as a business.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's very interesting. And obviously, the cost one being a huge factor there on the
Mhm.
greenfield side, right? Because then it's, also, one of the things with greenfield is, right, if you're doing these projects and they're taking a while, that's a whole timeline in itself that you're not generating any kind of revenue or production out of that facility, right?
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about the defining like and identifying where there are gaps potentially, and we've talked about the differences between the environment, right, that you would be doing some of these projects in. So let's talk a little bit about the technology that is
Mhm.
you can potentially utilize within here. And you mentioned a little bit about this in the beginning around the kind of blended idea or the mobile versus fixed type of
Mhm.
automation. So I guess maybe start it off and give us some definition around mobile versus fixed automation. What are the differences there?
Yeah. So mobile automation, you're going to often see it as something maybe a little quicker for installation, a little bit more
Okay.
modular. And I think one of the key aspects to it is it's very scalable in smaller increments. So if you're
Mm.
thinking of like AMRs, AGVs, maybe like an automated storage and retrieval system, a little bit more like cube style. So you might have climbing mobile robots or digging robots, but it could also be some other unique aspects. Like, for example, we have a pocket sorter, um, but
Mhm.
it's technically driven by autonomous mobile robots. So it's kind of like a robot on a rail system. And it's
Mm.
different than what you would think of a traditional AGV on the floor, but it's something that operates independently. So it's a little kind of a unique, different technology. But at the end of the day, it's easy to add and scale in smaller amounts. So I think that's kind of what we typically consider more of a mobile automation. And then you have
Mm.
fixed, which is going to be something that's a little bit more grounded in the structure. So if you think of like ASRS technologies, like shuttles, mini load, you'll think of conveyors, palletizers,
Mm.
depalletizers, a lot of those technologies that you're not going to be moving around. Typically, they're really good in the high throughput range. So, and you can utilize a lot more space going vertically. Um, so that's typically what we're looking at when we talk about fixed automation. And then, of course, there's blended, which is a mix of fixed and mobile. And
Mhm.
like I mentioned earlier, that's something we're seeing more of. And I think it's mainly because you can use certain things fit well into fixed automation, and mobile automation can be a little bit more adaptable. So if you have a wide range of products or processes, that blended approach can really be something unique and work well for your company.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting the differences there, and obviously, it sounds like there's benefits to all three approaches, right? But from a I guess timeline perspective, if we think about these, like it sounds like mobile, it sounds much easier to implement and less kind of build out and things like that. But when we talk about fixed and whether it's conveyor or ASRS type solutions, what is like timeline on that kind of stuff, and how does it vary in comparison?
Yeah, so mobile robots or mobile automation in general can be there's a little bit of a range with it. So if you're just adding a couple more mobile robots to your existing fleet, might only take a couple of months. If you're implementing them for the first time, or maybe some of that cubic storage, could take
Mhm.
maybe like 6 to 8 months from contract. But then if you're looking at more fixed automation with conveyors, shuttles, mini loads, palletizers, those can look more towards like the 12, 18, 24 months, really, depending on the scope and scale of the project. And then again, of course, like we talked about earlier, the environment that you're going into,
For
brownfield,
sure.
greenfield, all have their own aspects, how many modifications need to be made, can increase or decrease the timeline depending on, kind of what that looks like.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, great to hear there, and great to hear some kind of numbers around that too, on how long some of this stuff can take. Now, if we look at the mobile versus fixed or blended approach, even, right, how do we determine or make the decision, like what approach is right for us? Because I think in some cases, like think about fixed, like conveyors, right, like for some movement of packages or things like that, we could potentially substitute AMRs to do that
Mhm.
movement versus conveyors in some scenarios. So how do you kind of make the decision on like what's the right approach for you?
Yeah, and I think first it kind of starts with looking at the products they're handling and kind of the type of environment. So, for example, we do some stuff in the grocery food service industry, and um, you have a lot of pallet movements, which are great for either pallet conveyor or mobile robotics. But once you start looking at ambient, chilled, frozen, when you're going into
Mhm.
those multi-temperature zones, like deep freeze, not necessarily a great spot for a mobile robot. And then if you're
Mhm.
trying to go in between temperature zones, that's also like a challenge with a mobile robot because you get some condensation from the temperature zones, and there's a
Oh,
lot of
right.
sensors, things like that. So in that scenario, you look more towards like fixed and conveyors, but you still might use mobile robotics in certain zones to move pallets around, for example. So we look at the environment, we look at the products being used, and then we also try to understand like throughput is one of the main kind of design criteria for us. So there's, I think the great part about mobile robots is they're scalable in smaller increments. You can get a quite good amount of throughput through it, but at a certain standpoint, you reach like a throughput where it gets to be a little bit more cost effective and makes more sense from like a storage density and performance solution with
Mm.
fixed automation. And if you think about it in a certain way, like mobile robots at a certain point, you'd have to use so many on the floor to get something done. And at
Sure.
what point can you just accomplish the same with the conveyor? Because you can't really have people walking through when you're trying to get high performance with the mobile robots. And then also with conveyor, you can maybe use multiple levels of things going, merging, connecting. So once you get
Right.
to a certain throughput perspective, that's where we really see fixed making a lot more sense. And the great part is it can be one, could be the other, it could be a blend. And working with the systems integrator like TGW, we're going to really evaluate all of those different aspects of the business, and kind of bring it together. Also, I guess I forgot to mention, like the when we were talking about
Mhm.
the building condition, building heights will play a big role in what technologies you can use. So, for example, like a lot of the ASRS, like shuttles, mini loads, pallet cranes, you need quite a bit of like height to really get the most benefit out of it. And so, if you have a short ceiling, you're going to probably look for something a little bit more mobile. So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of factors you have to go into figuring out the right one. But if you're running your warehouse and looking for options, that's where you're going to get a lot of guidance on what technologies will make the most sense, and that's where that data analysis, the process review really comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely, and great points there all around, and I think that makes sense, right? You get a certain level of volume and throughput, like much like if your solution is throw more humans at the problem, like you can only fit so many humans in a
Right.
certain amount of space, right? Same thing with
Yeah.
the
Exactly.
robots as well. So great points there, and I'm curious. I mean, Can you, if we think about the scenario we talked about a little earlier, right, where, you have like a brownfield, for example, like you have an operation where you got to keep shipping, right, but you also need to do this project to try and get to the next level. Can you do a mix or maybe a blended approach, as you said, and kind of like like a phased approach, like starting with maybe some mobile and then maybe getting to like the fixed, or how can that kind of strategically be done?
Yeah, that's definitely something you can do. We do a lot of phased approaches in automation, whether it's mobile, blended, or fixed. We try to do what we call like a design day. So if
Mm,
we're installing for 2026, let's say, we're not going to design to run just 2026 volumes if we know they're growing, because then immediately you're already going to have to upgrade. So we try to give some like buffer time typically, especially with fixed automation. Mobile, it's a little
mm.
bit easier because sometimes you might just be able to throw a few more robots at the situation, and then you can
Yeah,
kind of scale up from there. And that's that scalability aspect. So, um, yeah, to do it strategically, we often plan in phased approaches. We see a lot of companies that are trying to understand automation. They'll dip their toes in with mobile robotics because it's easier for an ROI. It's easy to
mm,
justify. It's easier to understand like how it impacts your operations. And then sometimes after that, maybe it's the same distribution center, maybe it's another one. You might start going towards fixed automation if your throughput and those kind of building requirements all make sense. And that way you can kind of get familiar with the benefits of automation before going straight for a high performance, powerful system that
sure.
might be a huge investment up front, but typically can deliver still a pretty good ROI. So when we're kind of planning out the phases, we try to look at a variety of options, and we try to understand what's the business case behind it and where is your business heading and what do you need. So then we can kind of plan it out in those phases.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. I love your point too about, maybe starting with a little bit of mobile to get just a taste of automation, right? And see, what can it do for you, and then working your way up to some of that more fixed, right? More,
Mhm.
permanent, I guess, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Types of automation. So we've kind of talked about kind of some of the identifying factors, right? And considerations when, you identify your challenges, you think about the environment that you have, and the different technology options that are out there. So in that kind of, I guess we were talking about timeline here, right? So in what we've talked about so far, just this kind of project identification, I guess you could say. What is typically like the time frame you see that just that alone takes?
Yeah, I think the project implementation or even the upfront phase can vary depending on the company, the complexity, the types of products being used. But
Hmm.
when you're trying to look at automating, also might like a consideration might be your previous experience with it. So if you're
Hmm.
new to automation, it's probably going to take you a lot longer to do your research, to build the business case,
Yeah,
build the
great point.
understanding,
Yeah.
all of those kind of things. Whereas if you're experienced, even your decision making might change. Like if you're a huge company, the CEO doesn't need to be involved in every automation.
Hmm.
They understand we've done this. If there's the business case, you have different teams kind of leading it for a little quicker decision making. But the research phase can take anywhere from weeks to months, typically, and the
Hmm.
data gathering, same thing. Um, and then when it comes to you've made the decision, you want to move forward with what we would call like project realization, really bringing it to life. That can also take typically months, but sometimes more than a year, year and a half, just depending on
Wow.
the scope of it. So when you're planning for your next peak season, um, you might have already needed to start several months ago, depending on
Yeah, a
what type
couple
of
peak
business you're
seasons ago.
running.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're scaling up with some mobile robots, for example, yeah, maybe a few months, maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months.
Hmm.
But again, once you start getting into some of those longer projects, we often will, my cycle for a time starting with a company can take years from
Mm.
initial conversations to projects going live. So
Yeah.
it can be
Yeah.
quite a cumbersome process, depending on the scope. So I hate to give it so vague, but it's kind of like it depends on every scenario, which is
Sure. Yeah.
just kind of challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's often the answer in the supply chain world, right? It depends because
yeah,
it's such a case by case basis, and so many
yeah,
variables too that go into different operations, different businesses, different product types, and things of that nature. So very interesting there. And now you mentioned making the business case there, right?
mhm,
So we've kind of identified the gaps. We've considered our environment. We've considered the potential options of technology that's out there, and now we have to kind of put this business case together. And it's one thing to go through all this discovery, but then we got to get
yeah,
somebody up above to say
yeah,
yes, you can do this, right? So
mhm,
so one of the factors that falls into there obviously is the money factor, right? The financial aspect about that. So
mhm,
talk to us a little bit about kind of how do some of these financial factors play in, because we have some kind of leasing models versus like buying the equipment outright.
yeah.
How does that factor in, and how does that kind of impact the timeline?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So building the business case, it's a collaborative effort. On a systems integrator side, we have a lot of experience, but every company is different. Labor
Hmm.
rates are different. So we kind of need to collaborate and really work together to build the business case and make sure what we're doing is accurate. Sometimes we need to put in some assumptions as a placeholder, but when we're building the business case, it's often around initial investment costs. It's around maybe labor savings. It's around maybe electrical or power consumption. It might be related to, can we consolidate a warehouse or consolidate some operations? So there's a lot of factors that go into the business case, plenty more than that. Those ones are a little more tangible. There's some intangible ones like uh, you know, what's the cost of not automating, or what's the cost of
Mm.
growing and expanding manually. So you have to put in some at least assumptions there. Also, how does it enable you to sell more? So what we find often is it creates a great customer experience. You're shipping quicker, it's more accurate. You can build more loyalty that way, so it can help increase sales. But how do you
Mm.
measure that? That's a great question. You have to put in some
Yeah.
assumptions. And then we look at how are you buying the automation. So you
Mm.
mentioned like leasing versus buying. So this is a topic that I think isn't talked about enough up front, but it can have a really big impact on how your leadership team might make decisions. So when you're making you know these big investments, especially if you're doing a lot of automation, when you start buying the automation, you might purchase a lot of stuff and you don't start benefiting on your ROI until it's installed and you're actually using it. So, like we talked about, this could be a year, this could be 6 months, this could be 18 months, whatever it looks like, and that's where you're spending money, but you're not generating any benefit out of it.
Mm.
So that's like kind of the disadvantage of it, and you're tying that capital that could be spent maybe on acquisitions or store expansions, other things like we talked about during that time. So there is an impact to the ROI. But the benefit of buying the automation equipment is once you've gotten your ROI, that total cost of ownership is better because you're not, leasing the equipment and still making payments. So
Mm.
total cost of ownership might be lower that way. And so it might depend kind of how your business prioritizes things, which model sounds best. But when you look at leasing, working with a financing company, for example, you're not paying until you can actually start using the equipment. So the
Mm.
benefit there is you might get a shorter ROI. You can use that money that you'd be spending for a year or so uh, on buying the automation, and you can put it towards another strategic objective. Um, but then the downside is, of course, that total cost of ownership because you're leasing the equipment, and there's some uh, benefits that aren't as nice as the buying at that point. So you kind of have
Mm.
to weigh your pros and cons. It's a much bigger approach than it sounds, but there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages, and we see quite a healthy mix of those options, just depending on the company and how they operate.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously a lot of factors to consider in there, and make sure you're making that right choice there to do that. So now tell us a little bit about kind of going from essentially the concepts, right, and putting this together, and then getting to the reality of it, right, because
Yes.
we put the concept together, we have the idea, we figure out the budget and the finances and everything, but then we need to do some kind of engineering, I imagine, and things like that. So maybe give us some reality here in terms of like how long does this now take? That okay, we're moving forward right now. What's the next step before we actually physically start putting some things in place and getting this
Mhm.
project moving?
Yeah, yeah, like this. So concepting depends on the availability of data as well.
Hmm.
Um, but it can take a few weeks or a few months to put together at least like a very rough concept and understand here's approximately the performance, here's approximately what the system would look like, how it would work, how many operating hours, those sorts of things. Um, and then we kind of there's often a lot of assumptions or clarifications needed, and from there we're maybe taking another couple of weeks or months to make more of a firm design.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten the feedback, we like this, we don't like that. And you also have to do a lot of the consulting and kind of like teaching them about some of these technologies often,
Hmm.
um, and helping them identify which options are going to be best for them. So that can take several months, and then let's say they love the design, we've kind of put together what we call like a ROM price. So there will be a plus or minus certain percentage. Basically, it's like, hey, here's the system you're going to get. We'll do a design freeze, and then you might go into uh, the contract, or you might get firm pricing and then do like a letter of intent. Uh, and with the letter of intent, that's basically helping you speed up, maybe dedicating more engineering resources for the firm
Mm.
design, which I'll talk about in a second,
Yeah.
because contract negotiations can also take months. So it allows you to tie some investment, and allows us as a systems integrator to spend more engineering hours and work going into what we call more of a firm design. And so the firm design is like, yeah, we're moving forward with this project. Now we're going to have to draw everything in the way it's going to be set up. It's going to be really the more detailed plans of bringing it all together. So that often takes several months as well, because you're basically coordinating with all the vendors and doing a firm design for everything that's in there. So then when it comes down to the like reality check, it's really about the speed of communication, speed of decision making, and just the differences in the complexity of the project, the letter of intent or contract negotiations, and then going into that firm design. So uh, anywhere from weeks to months, each of these processes can take.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, as I said before, it's not as easy as like going to Modex ProMat and being like, oh, yeah, I want
Mhm.
that. And, just
Yeah,
pick it up and, drop it off. It's
set
not
it in
like
there and it's perfect. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's not like getting a couch for your house, right? It's not like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, drop it off on Friday and we'll bring it in, right? So a lot more going into that, right? And obviously, rightfully so, right? To make sure that the project is going to be delivering on the results that you're looking for and filling those gaps that you want to. So we've talked about kind of all of the preliminary things that happen before we actually even start to put something on the ground, right, and in the operation and start to install. So tell us a little bit about we've gotten through all these steps in the beginning. We've gotten the approvals and we're ready to go. We're ready to start installing and getting things up and running and moving on the physical front, right? So tell us like what goes into kind of that physical implementation and what does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So without getting too granular in the details, it's really about a lot of coordination. So we'll have a project team at TGW. We have somebody leading the project, doing all the main communications, working with outside vendors sometimes, like for electrical, whatever that's needed. And then there's also the project team, typically with the customer.
Hmm.
You need to make sure everything's aligned because there's certain things that their building needs or certain things that they're responsible for, like Wi-Fi, bringing power to certain areas. So like, it's a lot of coordination, and then it's syncing up that firm engineering. It's syncing up all the timelines, lead times for things, ensuring containers arrive in a certain order with certain goods, so you can start your assembly process. I know the way we do things is like a lot of our conveyor is pre-assembled, pre-tested, pre-cut. So it has a QR code in a specific location, and they're shipped together. So it's just meant to be, quicker to install and connect there. Um, but it's managing really the on-site teams and connecting it all together and bringing it to this point where we do all of the testing and then the
Mhm.
ramp up and go live, essentially, where we hand some things off to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And from like an internal perspective, right? You mentioned like TGW obviously has the project team, but then there also needs to be like I guess your customer or the internal company that's doing this is has their own kind of project team. So I'm curious, like, you mentioned like some of the infrastructure stuff, like making sure there's proper networking, Wi-Fi, power, and things like that. But what do you see maybe is the most often overlooked like stakeholder or resource that the customer should be making available or providing or having on the project team, but oftentimes maybe miss that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think the on the customer side, it's just having knowledgeable people that are able to connect to whoever they need to in the teams. And this is also true
Mm,
during the phase where I'm in business development and we're doing that kind of solution design piece. It's just making sure you have the right contacts in IT, and then it's making sure you have all of the right contacts for, like, if you have a landlord, for example, and all the permits you might need for certain modifications, maybe local restrictions, fire suppression, fire codes. So you have to at least be able to have all those resources at hand and connect to kind of one main project lead. We,
mm,
of course, try to be very helpful and upfront on understanding here's what you're going to need to put this project together. We have our timelines, we have our point of contacts. It's just an ongoing process. And then from resources internally, it's also like a big topic for us too, because you don't want to have a lot of people waiting on projects to install. Like, it's just wasted
mm,
resources at that point. So for us, we have to manage our pipeline of incoming projects, and make sure we have dedicated resources. So our leadership team is constantly meeting where they're sitting together, and it might be we need to hire some more people, we might need to contract some more people. We really need to picture long-term workflow. What do we have coming in? How are we going to support it to make sure we have that great customer experience we always deliver as well? Because
mm.
uh, if we don't have the resources or our customer doesn't have the resources, it just throws like kind of a yeah wrench into everything.
Sure.
And yeah, it's a lot to take on, and there's a lot more detail that goes into it, but yeah, it's a lot of coordination, I'll say, and a lot of just making sure you're aware of what needs to happen on
Mhm.
both our customer side and our side.
Yeah, yeah, great points there, and definitely, that just communication overall, I think, and getting to the right parties, right, to be able to do that, it's can help, I'm sure, not cause disruptions in the timeline or
Yeah,
anything like that. So great tips there, and then so we've gone through kind of the identification and putting the business case together. We're doing the physical implementation, and we've been talking about this project for how many months now, right? We're
yeah.
we're ready to see this thing like run and go live. So tell us about, the actual go live moment, right? Like what should be the expectation there, and maybe tell us too, I mean, from the TGW perspective, like how do you handle go live specifically?
Yeah. So go live. We've installed the equipment. We've done software simulations, emulations. Software is integrated. So it's really a collaborative process with our customers. We have certain defined criteria on when the automation project is considered successful. So maybe a certain performance for a certain number of days.
Hmm.
Um, and, testing has to be done. Everything runs smooth. So we'll have a team on site to support the go live. We'll troubleshoot any issues. We'll train the customers, right? They need to make sure when they're putting their team in there, they know what they're doing, they know how to operate it. And if we have an on-site team, which we do for a lot of our bigger projects, we need to make sure they're trained ahead of the go live. They know it's coming. They know how to maintain the equipment, that sort of thing. Um, and then, once all that criteria is met with the go live, we kind of like phase hand it off and often go into like our lifetime services to keep with the support. But for us, it's really about having a good, clear understanding and agreement in what is the expected performance, a clear agreement in what does this handoff process look like, and then collaboration to get to that point.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great way to end it here. And obviously, definitely appreciate all your insights that you shared with us today. I think truly incredible to kind of see the process that goes into all of these different things, and a real understanding of kind of the timeline too. So if you're somebody's boss out there and you're telling your employees to get us live with this automation by December of 2026 or November of 2026, maybe this will give you a little bit of a reality check on the potential timeline there. But really appreciate you joining us and talking with us about this topic. Now, you said, people need to get started now. They should reach out to their system integrator, and maybe TGW should be that person. So if people want to do that, what's the best way?
Yeah. So we have a few ways you can reach out. Definitely finding some of our contacts on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. It's Dexter Weber. It's TGW Logistics Group is what you look for. And then we can point you in the right direction. You can also email us. So for me, it's dexter.weber@tgw-group.com. But yeah, reach out, and we're always happy to have a conversation and see how things go and see what makes sense for you.
All right, awesome. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com, as well as in the notes here for people to easily find that. So, Dex, once again, thank you so much for joining me today and talking all about these projects. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.